I've never really wanted to acquire another business. And the reason for that is I really do see business as art. That is to say, I don't want to acquire somebody else's painting and hang it on my wall. I want to paint my own painting. And it would not feel as good to me having really acquired another artist's art and call it my own.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today, I'm here with David Steele. David is the co-founder and CEO of One Wealth Advisors, a $1 billion independent wealth RIA firm dedicated to helping clients simplify their lives and achieve financial goals. Also, and I know we're going to talk about this, interestingly, a restaurant owner. So, and I more than that, but we'll get into it. I don't want to give away too much here. First, I just want to say thank you, David, for being on the show today. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we start with kind of your story? Tell people about your background. I think you see it written on these in these bios, and it's very impressive. But I'm sure there's more to it than that. So if we can start with your story, that'd be great, and then we'll just take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm asked what I do, if at a cocktail party I'm asked what I do, if I'm with anybody, I'll sort of smile and they'll smile back at me because it's such a weird answer. And then somehow I put together a story and say, well, I'm the founder and CEO of a financial planning firm called One Wealth Advisors. But I also am co-founder and executive chairman of a restaurant company that has a lot of restaurants, 250 employees, a consumer packaged goods division. And additionally, I've helped start a yoga studio company and a music festival company. And now I'm on the board of those organizations, and I'm on some other boards as well. So that's what I do. But it all started, if you want my background about sort of how I got into this had this weird outcome. I grew up right around Philadelphia in South Jersey, and single mom raising my brother and I, and we didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty broke. So I had to work all through high school and college, and I worked in restaurants. And fast forward 8 years later, I graduated college, and I really wanted to open a restaurant, but I didn't have confidence that I was going to have financial security because the people I had worked for were usually very talented chefs who didn't have pragmatic business principles and financial discipline. And so they were always struggling. And so I had this idea that it was challenging to actually make money in restaurants. So I pursued being a financial advisor, which was more traditionally known to have more obvious sustainable financial rewards, and that was in fact true. And so I built that business, I think the right way, one client at a time, low and slow and steady. Didn't rush things, did it the right way, I think, did the right kind of business with the right kinds of clients. I hired my brother as my first assistant. Then he became my partner. And fast forward, that business now has 12 team members and $1.1 billion in assets under management. And it's an overnight 33-year success. It really is a wonderful, wonderful practice. We about 15 years into that, building that practice, I went to my brother and said, hey, man, I wrote this business plan for this restaurant idea I have, and I want to test the hypothesis that there can be a healthy tension between financial discipline, pragmatic business principles, and artisans, and that you could have both. And I got to do it. My brother was very supportive, and I said I was going to go down to 75% time or so and go try to open this restaurant with a different group of partners. And I did. It turned into, we opened it 16 years ago, and it ended up being one of the most successful restaurants in the history of San Francisco. It's called Flour and Water. It's like the plus sign flour plus water, which is sort of a gastronomic pizza pasta place. And the name is the ingredients for dough, so sort of elemental and simple. Anyway, I with my partners then I saw an opportunity to turn what was a restaurant into what is now a company. And I'll oversimplify the explanation because it's more complicated than this, but now we have 7 restaurants that I'm involved in overseeing and 250 plus employees and a consumer packaged goods division we're trying to take to be a national brand, and again, an overnight 16-year success. So that's how I've gotten to this place.
Well, I think you can answer that question at the cocktail party with, serial entrepreneur or just guy who makes businesses successful. It's interesting because I'm completely outside of the restaurant industry. I worked in restaurants when I was young as a waiter. Like that was the most I ever did. I never, got involved more than that. But I have always heard that, yeah, it's a money losing prospect. Like it's very hard to make money in the restaurant industry. So it is interesting to, sort of have that combination, but not surprisingly, someone who understands finance and comes from that world is then able to make other businesses that are traditionally maybe not considered financially successful. So when you first kind of decided, okay, I'm going to go become a financial advisor, what was the steps that you took to grow that business initially? Because you said 33 year overnight success, but that had to start somewhere. You hired your brother as an assistant. Like how did you get into that? Because I imagine that is a difficult spot to establish trust and allow people to, a starting out financial advisor, have people, sort of be willing to let you manage their money. So what were the steps you took there in the beginning?
It's a great question. We haven't picked up the phone in 16 or 17 years for business. It's by referral only now, but boy, it didn't start that way. The firm I worked for, a little regional firm, when Wall Street used to have finance companies, I worked on Wall Street in New York. We had a sales manager who basically taught us this idea of celebrating systematic behaviors. Specifically, we were cold calling. And I was cold calling and basically asking people if I could put them on my mailing list and eventually maybe meet them for coffee and then talk about the services we offer. And I was 24. And so at 57, like I am now with a very successful firm and a reputation, people call us. And there was a transition period of time where not only did nobody call us, I had to talk to 25 times more people than somebody who was more seasoned and trustworthy, if you will, that they knew what they were doing. But the number was above 0. That is to say, even at 24, when I kind of didn't know what I was doing, there were some people that were willing to listen to me and some people were willing to do business with me. And little by little, the percentage of people that we reached out to, we had higher success rate. And then eventually it got to the point where we're by referral only. But it was like, I often do when I do any business consulting, which I do occasionally, I tell the entrepreneur that most businesses, you're like Sisyphus pushing a boulder up the hill. But I reject the fable that says the boulder rolls down to the bottom every day and nihilistically he wakes up the next day and starts at the same point. I change the fable and I say, well, no, Sisyphus gets the boulder up the hill and maybe rolls back a little bit, but usually it's above where he started pushing that boulder up the hill. And someday that boulder gets to the top and he leans on it, wipes his brow and says, uh-oh, and it rolls down the other side. And he looks and there's a field of snow and it becomes a snowball effect. And so I basically I mix metaphors, I guess. And I do think that's what building a business the right way is, which is sort of slowly just have faith systematically push, 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 push. Don't know when, but have faith it will eventually get to the point where it's going to get a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of this out there in the world in terms of social media, and also just, in my experiences, like, if you don't stop, if you don't, if you keep pushing that boulder up the hill, like, eventually you're going to get there, and it's going to feel real heavy and like a real grind sometimes, but ultimately just kind of keep going. Do you think I've I feel like I've noticed this just in my life, and I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the podcast before, but do you think that there's a time frame, like, and maybe it's industry specific or something, but do you think that it's like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Do you think that there's a sort of a time frame that where if you stick with it this amount of time, most people are going to, sort of reach that successful, sustainable point in business? Or you think it varies widely?
A couple things. First of all, I would have been the person that would have bet against Google, Facebook, now Meta. Now it's the next one's OpenAI. I would have always been the one to bet against new businesses that are existing for the purpose of doing something nobody's ever done before.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a new business that nobody's ever done before, if you're the literally one in a million, I think, if you're the one in a million, you end up being Amazon or Google. The problem is the overwhelming majority of those, you don't hear those stories, the failures where they tried to change the way society buys things or consumes things or whatever. Usually, I think it's probably better as an entrepreneur to pursue something that is tried and true as an industry or a business model. And maybe from a creative perspective, you make it very much your own, but it is tried and true. And I think if you pursue something that's tried and true, and you have you have a playbook now. You can go look at the playbook of other. I mean, for me in a financial advisory business, I had infinite direction to turn to see playbooks. Same thing with restaurants. I could study successful restaurants and see what worked and what didn't work. And so if you follow something that in fact has been tried and true and succeeded over and over and over again, I think you can then see what the time frame should be for you getting to that point. But that doesn't mean you're going to hit that time frame. If it happens radically faster, I would submit you're actually not copying that business model, that playbook. You're probably doing something that is more unsustainable, accepting certain types of business. I digress, but I think that it takes how long it takes for you. And one of the ways to take the pressure off is to spend less money than you make personally.
Sure.
So if we take on, when I do business consulting, the first thing I ask, even if it's not in finance related, I'll ask the potential entrepreneur a lot of personal financial questions and figure out how many dependents they have and what their financial situation is. Because show me an entrepreneur who has 3 dependents and needs to go start a business that doesn't have guaranteed income day one, and that's going to be an entrepreneur that's going to have a much harder time succeeding than somebody who has no dependents and who has a very low cost structure personally. And it gives you the room to take your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you, this is, again, probably somewhat social media driven, but what do you think, business acquisition or start it yourself? Do you have, and I'm asking you this specifically because you said, follow a tried and true methodology. Do you think that means go buy a business that's already in place, or do you think that means start your own and, sort of follow the recipe?
Well, for me, I've never really wanted to acquire another business. And the reason for that is I really do see business as art. That is to say, I don't want to acquire somebody else's painting and hang it on my wall. I want to paint my own painting. And it would not feel as good to me having really acquired another artist's art and call it my own. That's what it would feel like to me. I don't think that's a fair analogy to project onto everybody else's decision to acquire existing business. I know it's not. I'm just saying for me, that's
Yeah.
the case. But I do also think that the beauty about starting something on your own, I will actually connect to the idea of why it is in my businesses we generally don't hire executive team level people from the outside. We're always promoting from within. And that is to say, when you're nurturing and developing people and promoting from within into ever increasingly higher levels within the organization, there is a coalescing around a central culture and vision and ideas. And, it's the devil versus the things about the person that inevitably you don't know. Same thing can probably be said about acquiring a business. You could get a great price for the business, but you don't really know what you're getting. So for me personally, the idea of acquiring another business is unappealing for those reasons.
Yeah. And I think that's something that it really sort of a very personal, and as you said, it's like it's a feeling, right? So some people really do look at business as art, entrepreneurship as art. I think if you relate it to the owning restaurants, being a chef. I heard this on a podcast and it kind of blew my mind. But basically, someone said like culinary arts is the only form of art where you put all the work in only for someone to destroy it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's that's like really kind of you're trying to create this thing that isn't meant to last. It's meant to be enjoyed, and business is kind of the opposite. But if the art form that your business is wrapped around is that, it's kind of an interesting I don't know, enigma surrounding restaurants. So when you decided to make that move, I guess not away from being a financial advisor, but to sort of add in uh, restaurateur, how did you said you went down to 75%. Like, what was the focus? How did you move that over? You said different business partners. I feel like it's probably structured fairly different than your investment advisory firm. What does, how do you balance that?
Well, yeah, I mean it's different disciplines, right? So the mastery that is required to have developed in financial planning is obviously very different mastery than is required to provide hospitality and cook great food. So when I made the decision that I wanted to open a restaurant, I spent over a year building a bit of a community around in the restaurant space, networking, so to speak. And little by little, I met people and learned about the industry and started showing people the business plan I had written. And I was really lucky and uh, uh, found some great partners who had developed mastery, not necessarily in operating businesses, but in providing hospitality and cooking. One of them specifically was the current CEO. I'm the executive chairman of what's called Flower and Water Hospitality Group, but the CEO is a guy named Tom McNaughton, and he was 24. He's 40 now, but he's 24 when I hired him, and almost immediately saw what I had, which is a genius chef, and made him a partner. He hesitated because he thought he wanted to go do his own thing, but I was able to convince him to stay, and we built the business together. Now he's running the company as a CEO, and he's an executive of the company, which interestingly now starts to look a little bit more like any other business, right? Because you're dealing with HR and IT and all and strategic planning, and it's not he's not a chef anymore at all. He's not he hasn't put as he says whites on for a long time. But at the time, it was very much different, mastery and specializations. Structurally, the restaurant company is a C corp. I don't think that's necessarily what you asked, but the restaurant company is a C corp. We're trying to scale it and maybe even someday do an IPO with that. Whereas the financial planning company is an LLC and it's a little partnership, and it's intended to stay small.
As you mentioned, kind of at the beginning, that the restaurant business isn't necessarily known for being financially sound, but coming from your background in investment advice, in entrepreneurship and everything, how did you apply those principles? Sounds like you convinced. I'm sure a lot of it is great partnership. You convinced a chef to stay and be a part of the growth, but I would imagine you set out to implement sort of a business structure and long-term plan kind of right from the beginning, which is probably not often the case when it comes to opening a restaurant. Like, how did you balance the two, knowing that sort of being a chef is an art form, and that they often butt heads, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I have a core belief, which is goal setting is human magic. We write down what we want to do in life. We can put that piece of paper in a drawer for a lot of years and come back and look at it and go, oh, wow, look at that. Years ago, I said I want to do this, and I did all of those things. And I really do think goal setting is human magic. I think maybe I learned that through being a financial planner, which ingrained in us is this idea of articulating goals, unpacking why they're people's goals, trying to apply quantifying what the goal requires to define it having achieved it, and developing a strategic plan in pursuit of those goals. So that's a framework for thinking about not just business planning or personal planning. It probably is a framework for life,
Yeah.
directional life anyway. Um, and so as it relates to the restaurant company, the healthy tension between artisanship and financial discipline slash pragmatic business principles really was couched in writing a business plan that I had already begun to write, that my partners helped me finish writing. We all agreed upon. And so now we had set our goal for what that one restaurant was going to be. And then what that then turned into is we had a business plans for other restaurants we opened. And eventually what it turned into was a business planning process for the company, not that involved many restaurants, not just a restaurant. That, of course, we bring to when we launch a restaurant, but it now is at a much higher corporate level.
Yeah, I love that you said that. The principles could probably be applied to anything in life, because I mean, it's it's so powerful to set that goal and then just reverse engineer it, what you need to do to get to that, because you have the roadmap. Now it's like, now we really just got to stick to it. And I think that's a good sort of comparison with your financial planning background. It's like, okay, what do I want retirement to look like? What do I want it, how my financial situation to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Okay, what do I need to do now to make that happen? And so if you plan for that bigger vision in the beginning, it just allows you to kind of set up and stay on track with that, sort of guiding principles out in front of you. I think it does make a lot of sense. And I mean, being in restaurants is not the only business that doesn't do this well. I'm a veterinary surgeon. That's my sort of day job, if you will. And it's not a career path that is known for being financially literate, for sort of making and running business well. It's just, I had we've got a Facebook group, and we invited someone, and his response was, take financial advice from a veterinarian. That's like taking medical advice from a groomer or something like that. And I laughed because he's not wrong, right? It's like overall, it's not a wrong kind of sentiment that certain groups of people tend to not. It just tends to be opposed, and so, but really, the principles are simple. What you've described is simple. It's not always easy because it doesn't come quickly, but it's ultimately like, as you said, set the goals and then just make a plan that will work towards them. And I think, yeah, that could be applied to just about everything in life, really.
Yeah. Okay. So when you went to school for your profession, was there a business planning or a business practice management class? No, I already knew the answer when I asked it. Same thing for lawyers, same thing for any form of doctor. Why not?
Right.
It's ridiculous. In fact, it's a crime that the part of the educational process for these practitioners, these very specialized practitioners, they're not taught how to build a business because, in fact, the overwhelming majority of them are going to be self-employed business people that are entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big problem. Again, I don't think it's exclusive to the veterinary world, but it is a big
No.
problem. It's like, we go to go to school for a long time, a lot of training, a lot of time, spent in class, and you probably could cut out a few hours and put some simple financial and business sense in there that would really benefit, you know, veterinarians, or again
But
in
what if
other
you
fields as well.
what if your university, quite simply, which would be an incredible alumni move, what if your university created a formal mentorship program between successful practitioners and those getting out of school with their degrees, and it was a formalized training program where they only met 3-4 times a year. Well, guess what? You're going to have a lot of very successful veterinary surgeons, more
Yeah.
so than if you didn't. And by the way, that I mean, it seems so obvious to me, but it's not. That's not my mission in this life to solve that problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does seem like it does seem like it should be obvious, and it just unfortunately is not treated as such. And it's thankfully things like you just described are starting to pop up, and I'm getting, like, luckily enough, getting invitations. Hey, you want to come share with some, with these students and that kind of thing. I think it is really important, but it just I think you know it makes sense to have this as part of training, whatever it is. I mean, I went through all these years of school and residency and stuff. I never talked to a client about money until I was out. And it was like, you gotta go give your estimate to that person. And I was like, what? Doesn't someone else do that? Like,
Well,
it's just
let
crazy.
alone what it means to if you're going to start your own actual physical space,
Right.
negotiate a lease, and deal with
Right.
the legal documents, and
Yeah.
get a bookkeeper, and what is a P&L,
Right.
what is depreciation, what are the taxes?
Yeah. 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 It's sadly missing, sort of, again, across the board. So I think that, it's good to have people like yourself that folks can go to for advice and guidance. But I do think, what I realize ultimately is, like, you have to take some level of responsibility, accountability in your own financial future, or you don't know if it's getting, sort of set up for you the right way. You've got to understand it a little bit. So I think having some level of training and, business sense would be a good addition to veterinary school, culinary school, whatever you want to say, wherever it's lacking. I think it would be a good thing to have there. So um, I definitely find that to be a big missing piece of the picture. Well, I want to get the chance to ask you the questions I ask every guest, David. I don't want to keep you all day, but I always, the name of the show is Know Your Why. I always ask every guest, what is your why? What's driving you? You've obviously had, sort of tremendous success, multiple different areas that seemingly don't have a whole lot of crossover, but you've managed to make them work. Kind of what's driving you at this point?
Well, I think human beings in general, once they know they're going to be warm, dry, and fed, really only ever pursue two things in life, all of us, and that is to be loved and valued. That's it. So I believe you could reduce every human motivation down to those two things, assuming our base needs are met. I discovered that, I don't know, my 40s. That was sort of a framing for how I think about life in my 40s. And it really has informed um, everything I do since then. And uh, so my for me, what I wake up every day and all I want to do is try to help people because it makes me feel valuable, makes me feel loved, um, and that's my why. I think it's in fact everybody's why.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think ultimately we it it doesn't. I think it doesn't always seem intuitive to people, but helping others, having an impact, it will improve your own life. It will improve your own, sort of feelings about yourself, about the way that you go about your day. I think it's just having that motivation is incredibly powerful. And as you said, so you gotta, I guess, get past the basic ones of having a place to live and food to eat, but ultimately, yeah, being surrounded by loved ones. There's really not a whole lot that's better than that.
I think so.
Tell us something about yourself, which I feel like is going to be hard to top since you are have a pretty varied background. But tell us something about yourself that maybe isn't common knowledge, special skill, a hobby, anything.
I had a phase of my life that was started in my 20s and I don't think was completed until my mid 40s, where I was really trying to be super cool and interesting, figure everything out. Uh, and it motivated me to do things like get a master's in literature,
Oh wow!
which in retrospect, again, I was probably doing to be so people would be like, oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
But I did, I do actually enjoy reading, and I actually enjoy intellectualizing on things and making my brain work in ways that are unexpected. I'm sure it has informed how I see the world, which is now different than maybe prior to those studies. But the truth is, I think it was very much because I wanted to be unexpected. And related to that, I wrote a play that was on stage. I've had 3 shows with my mixed media collage art. Um, again, in retrospect, all of those things really, I think, were done just to sort of prove to the world I could do these unexpected things. Who knows? Maybe opening a restaurant was related to that also. Um, but I've now realized, creation is important. It's for me, it's one of the ways that I achieve that sense of feeling valuable and valued. But my way to scale my creativity, I now have realized that my art is as an entrepreneur and nurturing teams, getting them to coalesce around ideas.
that's fascinating. I mean, like I sometimes feel like this gets overused, but truly a Renaissance man. I mean that the stuff that just kind of that varied background, and I think, I think you have to be that way to have sort of combined business with art, really. And it's a silly thing, and I've sort of a running joke with one of my friends she was a resident. I trained in surgery, but I talked about surgery very much like it's an art, and because I believe that, because I think that there's probably the easiest way for people to understand what that means. But it's like if I'm fixing a broken leg, a dog with a fracture, I'm fixing a broken leg. I already know what the end result looks like in my head before I even start. And so it's kind of, you have you have x-rays so you can see what the fracture looks like, but it's like I've already pictured in my head what it's going to look like. And it was something that I always had a hard time articulating. And when I would say something like that, they would laugh at me. But I I really do think that sort of it plays into what we talked about earlier. Like think about stuff, set your goals, whether that's on a financial scale, a decade down the road, or that's how I want this fracture repair to look like 45 minutes from now. Like it's all the same.
Or the painting to look what you want the painting to
Right.
look like.
Right. Like that's what people I'm not artistic when it comes to painting or drawing or anything like that. Like, but I imagine it's the same. I imagine a painter has a vision in their head of what that blank canvas might look like when they start and what it's going to look like when they finish, and then you're just making that happen. Like, then it's just an exercise in
Can I ask you, when you perform surgery, are you alone in the room? I don't know about veterinarian surgery. Are you alone in the room?
no. I mean, there's usually at least one other person in the room, like someone running anesthesia.
And then there's other people in the physical space in these
Yeah,
four
yeah.
walls.
Typically there's a few.
Okay, let's put a pin in that. I asked that for a reason. Okay, so I was watching this documentary years ago. It was a documentary on the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, who's one of the most important living artists in the world. And the documentary maker was interviewing him, and he basically walked the filmmaker into this warehouse, and he started going, and that's kind of how he talks, and he's pointing, and these people who worked for him came and started like putting together the sculpture. And Ai Weiwei has this very famous sculpture, which is this grouping of chairs, and anybody can go look it up online. It's really cool art. I mean, it's one of the more important pieces of art in our era. He leaves the room and he continues to be interviewed. Of course, we don't know. This isn't what the film's about. Ultimately, but for me, it was a lesson on business and the analogy to business and art, which I'm going to make in just a moment. He goes back the next day and he points, and little by little, the sculpture is forming. And oftentimes when I'm doing business consulting and I tell that story, I say, who's the artist? Well, Ai Weiwei is not the artist, but I would contend that there were a lot of artists involved in there. Okay, fine. I can probably get support for that argument. Now I go back. I put a pin a few minutes ago into you performing surgery on a dog's broken leg, and I think, how is that any different?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not how it gets trained to us, or at least not how it got trained to me. It's like there are all kinds of principles, and the principles matter, right? Like the principles matter a lot, but at the end of the day, like you're trying to create a picture, and I think like the reason why this even ever came up and why it became sort of a running joke was it was like when I was training residents, I would sometimes get frustrated that they don't see it, that they don't see what I see, right? And I'm like, just do this. Like, and I know like I'm like not describing it well or whatever, but I think that, you can, again, if we run it back to that business analogy, right? Like you've got to, as a CEO, or, you've got to direct your team, you've got to be able to articulate your vision. And so it's, and very related to the story you just told, right? Like he's essentially, he knows what it needs to look like. He's sort of giving the direction to the people that are working with him. So I think it is a fascinating thing to think about, combining art with business, art with science, whatever these
or art is business,
right?
I mean, go walk into one of my restaurants now with the context of the story I tell. Stand in the restaurant, look around, and tell me argue to me that it's not a living, breathing art installation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so often those worlds try to get very separated, science and art, business and art, whatever, like that.
Well, we as our culture say that artists are sacred. That is to say, a real artist is somehow able to tap into, I'm not a religious person, but let's just say God. Somehow that artist is able to tap into God, and that is inaccessible to you and me. The artist has accessed the sacred.
It's true.
And I would like to deconstruct that.
Yeah, no, it's very. I mean, I can't believe I'm going to talk about Taylor Swift on this podcast, but the she is both. She is an artist and a business person. There is no way, despite how talented she is, there is no way she gets to the level that she has gotten to of being a billionaire without also making extremely smart business decisions along the way. Like, she's an incredibly prolific songwriter, like I don't think people, she may not get enough credit, honestly, for like the songwriting ability that she has. Like, and I'm not really a huge fan. I just recognize that it is incredibly impressive what she does from a songwriting standpoint, and continues to put out successful music time and time and time again. And it's because it's good. Like, it's good, people enjoy it, and she takes her platform and uses it wisely within the business world. And so I think it's just, again, it's just that sort of that crossover between art and science or business. I mean, you could apply it to, some of the people in the sporting realm. It's just things that you don't think necessarily go together. If you do combine them,
I
like,
just don't think there's
incredibly powerful.
anything wrong with. I don't think there's anything wrong with just calling her an artist, and I don't think there's anything wrong with calling you an artist or me an artist. That is to say, I don't know that they are in binary opposition.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. That makes total sense. It is an art form to succeed at something where you're creating something.
That's it.
That's really it. That's the kind of the whole gist of everything. And I think if we see it that way, it can change your approach to it. Like, you've got, I mean, like, as in business, you talked about, like, still need to know what the P&L is. You still need to have the structure in place. But if you want to create something, it's an art form. And so I think it's just, people try to separate those, but it is really a fascinating concept. David, when people want to reach out to you and they hear this, what's the best way?
I have this silly little website I created that has all of my stuff I do and I'm involved in. It's davidsteele.xyz. And then my main professional endeavor is my financial planning company, which is onewealth.net. And my email address there, which is the main email address I use, is dsteele@onewealth.net.
Okay, perfect. We'll get that stuff in the show notes for people. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out today. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I loved this topic. This was great. So I think other people will resonate with it too. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Truly my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks listening, make sure you connect with David. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. Please like, rate, and review it so we can get more great guests. And thank you all for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?